Today we are comparing Yamaha's P515 with Kawaii's ES920. We're going to be comparing side by side the actions, the sound, the tone generator, all of the features, the accessories, the weight. Let's get started right away. We're going to get started first on the piano action. I feel like as a piano player, that is the thing that everybody wants to know about. I love talking about piano action, and I'm probably one of the pickiest people you will find when it comes to piano action on a weighted 88-note keyboard. In the past, I have made many of my decisions almost exclusively based on this function. Now on the Kawai side, we've got their RHIII action, and this has got some redesigned sensors in it. It's not the RHIII improved because, of course, that's coming out on the CN201, CN301, and if we see another version of the ES920 come out, which I imagine we will at some point, but likely not for a few more years, it'll have the RHIII improved. The only difference between the RHIII improved and not is just the key noise. So this is going to be a little more typical in terms of the amount of mechanical sound you get off it, very similar to what you might find on, say, the Roland PHA4 or many of the Yamaha actions. The RHIII is a very popular action, and I happen to like it because I think it strikes a really great balance of resistance, control in your lower range, but I also find that it's a nice crisp action for faster playing and more advanced playing. So a couple of things to know about Kawai actions generally. They do not put faux textures on the keys for appearance sake only. I think this is the experience they have on the acoustic side because none of their acoustic pianos have any type of a faux ivory or faux ebony texture on them. They all have this very, very slight matte finish with like a microporous technology on the top on most of their acoustic pianos. They have carried that over to what they're putting on their digital pianos. And what this does is it provides a really nice mix of that glide versus stickiness on the key. You don't want a key that's going to be super slippery. You don't want a key, on the other hand, which is going to catch your fingers and start to, pull the pads of your fingertips away from your fingernails when you're playing a little bit more aggressively. So getting that nice blend is really important. Now, a piano action is never just strictly the mechanics. It's how they've mated it to the tone engine and all of the touch curves that go along with that. So on the ES920, it's really nicely dynamic. I like how they've got this mated to the kind of the dynamic touch curve on the instrument in terms of its default setting, because of course you can get in and edit the touch curve if you want to. But I think perhaps the thing I like most about the RHIII action is just how buttery and how connected it feels in your middle dynamics. So I'm going to say everything from sort of a mezzo piano up until, you know, approaching, you know, a fortissimo. There's no sense that you're having to sort of hold yourself back because you're going to, you know, get this inappropriate explosion of sound. But on the other side, it never feels heavy. It has a triple sensor and it also has the escapement. And you've heard me say on several other videos that I think what escapement gives you is just that little bit of extra resistance that you never feel unless you're playing in like a pianissimo range. So there's just this extra sense of control, and it makes voicing chords when you're playing very softly just a bit easier. At least that's what I find. Just making that extra, that top note ring out a little bit more. Let's now move to the Yamaha. The Yamaha is the NWX action. So this is actually a wood core. This is going to be more similar to what you might find in like the Roland PHA50, or maybe even more accurately a comparison, some of the grand stick actions that you find on like the Kawai CA series or the MP11 would probably be an even better match or a better comparison in terms of the key design here. Now, the Yamaha has kind of gone the way of a lot of how the industry has trended and put some faux texture on the keys. Usually, or at least what you find on some of the manufacturers, is you find some texture being added to the white keys and the black keys are a matte. Yamaha has added an ebony texture to the black key and the white key is a matte. Now, anytime you're adding texture, you're basically adding a little bit of extra slipperiness or less grip because there's just less surface area there for your skin to be in contact with. And so this just becomes a personal preference. I actually prefer the black keys I'm playing on to be a little stickier and the white keys to be a little more slippery. In this particular case, it has the opposite effect. None of this is like, you know, on the extreme. They're all just subtleties. But that's generally what texture will do. Whatever surface it's on, it just tends to be a little bit more slippery and less grippy. Now, this action reminds me a lot of the Roland PHA4 action in one regard, which is those are the two actions on the market, in my experience, that have a higher static resistance than dynamic resistance. That is, it takes more effort to get the key in motion than it does to keep the key in motion. And so you sort of have this, a bit of a, like a, not a slingshot effect, but there's a bit of a, like a falling over effect. Once you get the key in motion, it's a little harder, I find, to actually play in your lower dynamic ranges because you've sort of got this initial inertia that you have to overcome, and then it's really hard to keep your key or your fingers sort of held back. For the same reason, by the way, I've never been like a super strong advocate of the Roland PHA4 action for advanced classical players either. But that dynamic is totally absent on the Kawai. The dynamic and static resistance on the RHIII is virtually the same. So that's one difference. The second difference, of course, we already mentioned, the difference in the key surface. Third difference is going to be the overall weight of those two actions. On some of these keys, depending on where you weigh it out, you're going to be over 80 grams, which makes the P515 action, to my knowledge, one of the heaviest actions on the market. Now, I know professional players that actually really like that. They've got seasoned fingers, they've already got the muscle built up, and this feels pretty normal. People who are new to piano, however, 80 grams is going to feel like a workout, in some cases an uncomfortable one. Over here, you've got a dynamic static resistance that's going to be in your mid to high 50s, which is a lot more similar to what you're going to find on like a smaller to mid-size acoustic grand piano. I would say the Kawai is going to feel a lot more comfortable to people who are coming from a classical background and are already used to playing on a fairly new, well-maintained acoustic piano. I think the Yamaha is going to feel more at home to people who are already experienced on acoustics, maybe experienced playing larger grands or used to that, and where they're going to be playing this in a fairly like aggressive environment where they're not going to notice some of those other dynamics I mentioned about maybe being a little tougher to bring out some of those very, very quiet nuances, in my view. Moving right on now to speaker performance. I'd hazard a guess that if you are looking at either one of these instruments, the speaker performance is probably going to be a consideration. There are some pianos out there and price points out there where just having a speaker period is a nice convenience, and you're really not going to be too picky about the fidelity of the sound coming out of that speaker. But when you start to get closer to that $2,000 price point in the portable range, speakers aren't so much an afterthought. This is really an important consideration for a few reasons. If you're using this in a professional setting, you want to know whether you can bring this thing without an amp to a rehearsal, to a small performance space, and get away with your onboard speakers. It's a really big deal. The second thing is if you're going to be playing at home and you maybe are having this do double duty, you want this to be your home piano and occasionally be taking it out, it's got to sound full enough that you're not feeling like you compromised by not getting a console piano where the speakers are typically more of a focus for the manufacturers. So let's talk speakers. On the ES920, we have a total of 40 rated watts of speaker output. On the Yamaha, we have a total rated output of 40 watts. So according to these manufacturers, the effective power of both of these machines should be pretty similar. However, the way in which they present sound is actually quite different, and I'm going to explain as best I can what I'm hearing out of this one and what I'm hearing out of that one from the perspective of playing it rather than being out there behind it or in the room. The Kawai has two 20-watt speakers, and underneath the machine are actually two large tone ports that assist in sort of creating a bit more of a spacious, full bass tone. And you also have these four-way EQ on the 920, so you can really shape and craft that tone. The way in which the speakers present is a nice, wide, full tone that feels like there's still a little bit of separation between you and the sound source. You don't have any of the harshness that you sometimes get if you feel like you've got an ear right up to a speaker. So there are moments where you don't hear quite the same level of treble detail as if you had a really good set of headphones on. But for the most part, it creates a very sculpted, nice, wide stereo image, which isn't lacking in bass. It's got a nice full mid-range and definitely competes with a console of a similar price point in terms of just the quality of the sound. Down in the bass, now it does at moments sound like there's a little bit of compression, like as you really push it, so as to not break the speakers up. But it's very subtle. The mid-range on this instrument really is the sweet spot, and I guess it should be because that's where you're going to do 90% of your playing. You got lots of headroom. You never feel like you've hit any kind of a limiter or a compression effect on there. It's super dynamic, warm, and full. And there's never any level of treble harshness. When you get up to the high end, the top 2 octaves, if you're really pushing the volume, and this is actually the case in real life too, there's such a thick attack on the SKEX. That it definitely punches. It never gets to the point though where it's piercing. I feel like just generally these speakers aren't putting a lot out that's kind of anything in the 11, 12K or higher range, so you never really get that super piercing. But there's definitely a ton of what sounds to me to be sort of in the 8K range. But overall, these are super powerful speakers, given that I only have it at 50%, and that's as loud as I would ever need it to be playing for a personal, personal musical time. If this needed to be in a professional setting or rehearsal or anything like that, there's lots of headroom here to really get a ton of presence out of these pair of 20-watt speakers. Let's move now to the Yamaha, because even though the wattage is the same, the configuration is different. On the Yamaha, they have no lower tone port, and that's neither a good nor a bad thing. It's just it's a different approach. What Yamaha has done is they've split each speaker into actually like a dome tweeter as well as a two-way speaker to deal with the lows and the mids. They've also angled the speakers so that they're pointed a lot more directly at your ear. So that sense of a little bit of distance between you and the sound source that you have on the Kawai, for better or worse, is not there on the Yamaha. You feel like you've got your ear right at the speaker and you're hearing every last little nook and cranny of that sound. Now I like that because it gives you lots of treble detail and you're hearing it just as well as if you had headphones on. Here's where it's not as big a plus for me, is that you don't have the easy EQ to be able to knock the trebles down if you need, and even playing kind of at mid volumes, you're starting to get a little bit of that really high-end crispiness or harshness right on the tops of the notes, even in the mid-range, playing at medium volumes, that I had to be right up at the very top at high volumes in the Kawai to kind of get that same effect. Now, I say that with this caveat. Generally, I think Yamaha's P series, the P125 and the P515, have done a really good job of their speakers. The P125, in its price range, really for the last few years, I think has had the best onboard sound. I think the Kawai ES920 came very close in terms of its speaker presentation, and the P515 has a nice beefy super tight sound, and as I said, you're really splitting hairs when it comes to dissecting instruments at this quality range. But those are my observations, is that because it's pointed a little bit more at your ear and more of the wattage is coming straight at you than being dispersed into the room, like on the Kawai, you do have to ride the volume a little bit more. You just need to be a little careful about those trebles on your ears. It can just get a little bit crispy at times. Next, let's talk about the piano tone. Both of these instruments are equipped with samples of their flagship acoustic pianos, respectively. So the CFX Grand, which in person is a very impressive 9-foot concert piano from Yamaha, that's their primary sample over here. Then you've got the SKEX sample on the ES920 is sort of their flagship sound, coming from their flagship 9-foot concert Grand as well. And the SKEX is just as gorgeous in different ways as the CFX. It's a very, very colorful piano and just such a unique growl to the bass of that piano. It's a very exciting instrument to play. They also are equipped with other sample sets from their company. Yamaha, of course, bought Bösendorfer, and so you've got a Bösendorfer Imperial sample as the secondary sound on here. You have the SKEX, which are two other high-level pianos that Kawai produces on the acoustic side. They've captured that in here. Let's now listen to some quick samples of all of that stuff so you can hear it at home. And here's the Bösendorfer. And then as soon as you get past the Bösendorfer, then you get into some more stock sounds. This is one called the Studio Grand. Bright Grand. Warm Grain kind of had a nice vintage vibe to it. Over to the honky tonk. Let's now listen to the Kawai. We've of course already been listening to both of these severally over the review so far. Here is the SKEX. So the Kawai also has alternate sounds other than the SK-EX. They've got an EX loaded, which is kind of the earlier version of the SK-EX, tended to have a brighter tonality to it and sounded a little bit more, honestly, like the CFX does, whereas the SK-EX, a little warm and a lot more of a sort of a darker shades to it. And here it is. This is called Jazz Clean. And Warm Grand. And Pop Grand. I really like the SK5 sample, to be honest, and the upright sample. And then a few others to pick from before we're into our E pianos. Now, both of these have the ability to edit this sound pretty extensively. And there are resonance engines on both, and there are basically additional artifacting that's added onto it. So you can hear some of the mechanical sounds or some of the other simulated sounds. And they both have lots of parameters. So in terms of your, let's call it secondary tones or mechanical sounds that get mixed into that tone, I think Kawai actually has quite a few more options and editable parameters on that front within their Virtual Technician. They have two resonance engines on there, damper resonance and cabinet resonance. Over on the Yamaha side, they have fewer of those other kind of artifacts that you can edit and play with, but they've got a few more resonance engines happening. So they both, in my view, it nets out to kind of a similar experience, which you can really get in there and toy with this and create very much your own grand piano. Now, like both of these instruments, they've got the ability to do this on the display. I have to give it to Yamaha in terms of what you can do on the onboard display and still feel like you've got like a lot of control, but also sort of some nice enjoyable visuals that go along with it. The Kawai display is more basic. It's functional. You can get everywhere you need, but it's not going to be quite as visual. However, if both of these machines are hooked up to their companion apps, then you've got plenty of functionality through both the Kawai app as well as the Yamaha app in terms of being able to manipulate those piano tones. So as always with piano sound, it's such a personal thing. It really comes down to what you enjoy, and when you're at this level, both companies have done a great job of capturing their respective instruments in a very authentic way. It's just going to come down to what you resonate with the most. Let's move on to interface. Something I really like about machines these days that have it is onboard EQ. When you're hooking up to a new amp, when you're hooking up to a PA, even when you've got a set of headphones on, the ability to quickly sculpt the tone with a physical EQ is a really handy thing. Yamaha has this on some models. In fact, Yamaha had this kind of as a default on like some major predecessors to the P515. I remember, was it like the CP300 or the C3, one of those, like just a big tank of a machine, and they had the three-way EQ, and that was maybe one of the first machines I actually saw it on. They haven't continued on this particular line. Kawai never used to have it, and they've now introduced it, just like Roland has on the FP60X and 90X. So this I find to be super handy, is that onboard EQ. In terms of tone selection, they're both very easy to navigate. They've both got their tone areas very well laid out, very well marked. It's easy to go through every one of them, and they both behave in the same way. You can cycle through either by pressing this button repeatedly or using your arrow keys up and down to get through. So they both behave pretty well exactly the same way in that regard. They both have the same type of functionality when it comes to split, transpose, and blend, and they've got kind of a similar level of physical access through the interface up here. Not too much of a difference there. When it comes to the rhythms and what they've got going on there, they both have a fairly similar function, but I have to give Kawai points for a much clearer layout that's a little more intuitive to understand. Like you've got big, you know, not only does it say record or play or start and stop rhythm, but you've got some of these graphics up here that you would normally associate with those functions too, those transport controls. So like as your eye's catching that out of the corner of your eye to manage, you know, going up and down through the different rhythm variations or the accompaniment mode, this I find just a little bit easier to manage than just getting into your rhythm here and then having to do it all through, you know, keys that way. But they both do have that onboard auto accompaniment rhythm function. And again, you can get to it in both cases through the interface. They both have USB recording. And the nice thing is you can access that in both cases through the front. And I don't know who copied who here, but I really like the fact that they both have these upward facing. So it's very easy to record an MP3 or a WAV file onto these and take it with you. You can also record MIDI onto these strips. Now, talking about this, there is a big difference though in the MIDI recorders or the MIDI sequencers on these two machines. I happen to think that most people doing sequencing these days where you're into multi-track stuff are probably doing so either on a DAW, at the very least a smart device where you've got some really nice visuals where you can see the linear recording process going on, or you're using a workstation. I don't know of too many people who are actually using 16-track sequencing where you've got basically really no graphical control or context to what's going on. But there are some people obviously out there where this is still a critical feature because Yamaha has included it in the 515. This actually has a 16-track sequencer. Kawai used to have this back on one of the CN3, you know, X series. I don't remember exactly when they discontinued it, but this was a feature they used to have on there. Yamaha still got it on there. So if it's important to you, then you should be aware they've got that 16 tracks. Over here, it's really just 2 tracks if you're going to do any sort of onboard MIDI recording. Otherwise, you've got connectivity out the back where both of these will connect by USB to your computer and you can feed MIDI out of there. Here's another big difference though. The Yamaha has the USB audio interface. So if you want to be using this as a sound source or those speakers as your speakers from the computer, then the USB audio interface makes that easy to do. And both of these also have Bluetooth connectivity, so you can connect to the apps as we talked about. You also can feed Bluetooth audio to both of these machines, so you can play your favorite music through your mobile device and kind of play along with it. It's actually a pretty fun experience to do that if you've never tried. So here's my final thoughts on the interface. They're very similar and you kind of have to squint to see major differences. If I had to, I'd give Kawai a bit of an edge just because the interface feels a lot more modern. I think the graphics and the overall layout are a little more intuitive. but fundamentally both can accomplish virtually the same level of functionality without having to deep dive into menus. So thanks to both manufacturers for delivering that. I really do not like when you have to go so deep into your menu to accomplish what should be a fairly straightforward common function. And you don't have to do that in either one of these cases, which is great. Next topic is weight. And this is on the review because it's not a subtle difference. The P515 clocks in at just about 48 pounds, whereas the ES920 is around 37 pounds. A 10-pound weight difference for an instrument that is going to be portable is actually a pretty big deal. 10 pounds is the reason I just went from an RHII 2000 to a Phantom 08. 10 pounds can be the difference between ripping a gig bag versus not over the course of 6 months or 12 months of lugging something around. So if you are traveling frequently with an instrument, you will know that weight is a factor, it's a component in your decision. So you may have a way to deal with instruments that are in this weight class. That's awesome. If you don't, be aware that even though visually these look like they have a very similar form factor and you'd expect them to have a fairly similar weight, when you pick these up, it's not a particularly subtle difference. This is going to be in a very similar weight class to, say, the Roland FP90X. So it's not like this is on an island. It's just this, for the wattage it gives you and the quality of action it gives you in the 38-pound range, that's actually the standout. Because most other instruments in this 35 to 40 pound range have a smaller form factor and none that I know of that are going to give you the quality, the action, and the versatility of the action of the RHIII. So that is definitely worth noting. Next is accessories. Both of these instruments are available with matching wooden stands and triple pedal systems. And out of the box, both come with really beefy sustain pedals, which is great. There's no need to go out and buy one of those extra heavy-duty sustain pedals. It doesn't come with the little plastic flippy thing. This is great. So lots of options here, but generally you can operate it as a slab with like a third-party stand like we've got here in the studio, or you've got the matching stands and the optional triple pedal. Both of these also come in black as well as white. You can't see them, but they come with music stands to boot, and both manufacturers also offer these with carrying cases as well. Man, if you can get in front of one of these two machines, that would be the very best, because of course, listening to piano tone is one thing, interacting with it is a whole other thing. So take all of this, of course, with a grain of salt, just my opinion, but hopefully it's been helpful. We really appreciate you checking out the channel and the video. If it's been useful to you, please hit that subscribe, because we come out with videos and reviews all the time. And you know what? We'd love to have you back as part of the community. My name is Stu Harrison. Have yourselves a great day.